Hey everybody, my name is Dane Sanders and I welcome you to Fast Track Coaching. For about 3 years or so, every week we've had a chance to get in conversations, myself and my guests, around ideas that hopefully will help you in your creativity and in your business. And today is no exception. I'll introduce my guest in just a second, but for those of you who are new to the show, let me give you a little bit of context. This is a brief conversation. It's really 30, 40 minutes or so of like sitting down and having coffee, except for you're watching while we're engaging in the dialogue. And the hope is that you all will have a chance to engage it, not just spectate. The way we do that is you can engage on Twitter when this is broadcast live, or you can engage in the chat room when this is broadcast live. And myself and my guest hopefully will both be in the chat room at the same time while it's being broadcast, and we can engage you there. But on top of that, even if you're watching it on replay, the hope is that you would get what you need right now this week to not change the world or kind of have a flick the switch where everything is all perfect, but you would actually get some new contribution for you to move your business or your creativity forward just a little bit right now. And if you're in a place where that could be really resourceful, then I hope you enjoy the conversation, and I especially hope you enjoy our guest. Rob Hatch is the COO of Human Business Works, which is an extension of one of the many kind of enterprises that author Chris Brogan has started. And I'll let Rob speak a little bit more on that whole deal. But first of all, Rob, thank you for coming on the show today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So, Rob, you have had an eclectic background coming into this game. And maybe for the folks that are maybe a little insulated from the world that is the empire that is Chris Brogan and everything he's touched. Why don't you get us up to speed a little bit about what you do in the context of where you do it?
Sure. Well, what I do right now is as the Chief Operating Officer for Human Business Works. So really, a few years ago, Chris Brogan started a company called Human Business Works, aptly named because he has a real true belief and understanding, I think, a deep understanding of the importance of what we're now talking about is amplifying the human digital channel and having a really human presence online and using the tools for your business to develop that human interaction and to be human with your clients. So my role here is really, I keep a lot of the machines running in the background and helping to work with Chris and kind of guide the direction of Human Business Works and the implementation of our goals and our mission. So,
super helpful. And now, for those of you guys who don't know, I promise we won't be spending too much time on Chris in particular, but he is a character that's worth at least referencing in a little bit more detail, especially if you're not familiar with it. Chris and another guy who we've had on the show, Julien, as you know, Rob has, they co-wrote a book called Trust Agents, which on a popular level kind of put them on the map, although all those guys were deeply engaged in these ideas, especially as social media kind of launched onto the scene. And of all the kind of marketing, consulting kinds of guys, Chris was one of the first to kind of crack the 100,000 followers on Twitter, and I and many around the world kind of looked and went, who's this guy? And I know I was introduced to him for the first time from another one of our past guests, Seth Godin, who at the time, I think he was following one person on Twitter, and he wasn't really engaged in Twitter. He had I think at the time he had 40,000 followers, and he was following one person, and he hadn't even tweeted yet. And to my knowledge, he still doesn't tweet. He just kind of reposts his stuff. But the one person Seth was following was Chris, and I thought, well, that's powerful. He's making a statement here that's worth checking out. So I started engaging Chris Brogan, and now, of course, Chris is far more of a household name. But if you're unfamiliar with him, you should follow at Chris Brogan, and while you're at it, follow at Rob Hatch. When I initiated with the folks at Human Business Works, and I've been watching the evolution of what Chris has done on a for-profit world, and now really expanded well beyond for-profit and non-profit, just anybody who wants to engage the marketplace, specifically about this crazy idea of being human in a virtual space, is a really striking idea that I think folks like me who are aspiring creative professionals really we could learn a lot from, because it's ironic because it's tempting, at least in my experience, as soon as I click on my kind of virtual self, it's tempting to feel like I'm creating something that is distinct from me, that I can kind of get away with things that I can't get away with my neighbor, for example. And I've certainly fallen prey to the temptation of being goofy online and making a ton of mistakes. But Chris is one of the first guys that I heard articulate this kind of resonant sense of, well, what if we spent more time being human and less time being clever with the internet? And of course that was kind of set the table for you and your team to jump in. So am I close to home in describing this idea of human business works when I describe it the way I am?
Well, I think you are. I mean, certainly the where the idea comes from and how the evolution of the idea that Chris sort of discovered in his own interactions around being human and engaging people online and finding value there. And your story of being representing yourself differently online than you might with your neighbor. I would ask or wonder really what's the more authentic self there, if we were to throw around that word, but that you just might find the opportunity to represent a different aspect of your humanness online, rather than the fact that you're being clever or and it's just not, your neighbor might not be the right audience for the part of you that you're bringing to the table online, and I think that's really the difference. It's not more or less human in those interactions. It's to whom are you speaking and how are you speaking with them and what part of you are you sharing.
Got it.
And well,
that's helpful. So I like that on a number of fronts. One, it's way less cynical, and and it's not kind of an either or whether you are being human or not. But there's different aspects of it, and there's also a sense of I guess generosity to consider the other person that you're engaging, and an interest in engaging them on a level that is kind of in line with what they're interested in, and that seems to make a lot of sense to me. And if you don't mind, I'm actually I'll throw myself in the fire here and get a little personal, but I know growing up, for me, the temptation was to feel like a chameleon, like as third boy in a family of origin, where all the classic signs of you finding your spot and fitting in. And I remember this sense of like I would engage one audience, and all of it felt authentically me, but I could kind of shape shift depending on my context, and I would be very attuned to kind of what my surroundings wanted, and I would try to be that thing for that person. But there was something that was disingenuous in that engagement sometimes, when I felt like I was more concerned about the opportunity in front of me and how I could fit that opportunity, as opposed to trying to find alignment with kind of who I actually was made to be. And again, there's a bunch of philosophical presumption in those statements, but I think you're tracking. How would you engage someone like me who had that temptation to kind of shift relative to the context they find themselves in? Is that smart to do when it comes to this idea of human business works?
Well, so there are two things about that that stuck out to me. One was the recognition that you were doing that first and foremost, that you were making those shifts, and the second is the wondering that you're having about whether or not it aligns with, or you're being disingenuous with some sort of part of yourself. And so it sounds like you were really trying to figure out where those two things meet, because both of them, I think, those are real strengths to be able to recognize this is how I'm operating, and it is a strength to be able to adapt to your audience and to understand who they are. And as you said, you used the word generosity before, which I really loved, being generous and honoring who you're with. And I think when you're approaching it from that place, and that sounds like the generosity is sort of where you've come from that boy who is shifting to being more comfortable with who you are and still shifting, but from a place of generosity. So it sounds like it was a bit of a process for you. So,
well, you can talk to my therapist about it, but yes, it was.
but all of it sounds like a real strength, and primarily in being able to acknowledge that. But how that moves into, say, the human digital channel is thinking about the intentionality of what you're trying to do. Are you trying to push content out to just to actually engage and connect with customers and start to recognize that this type of content serves this audience and this type of content serves that audience? Or are you doing it just to make a sale and just cater to or pander to? And I think that's the distinction. An example recently, one of the folks that I have the privilege of working with is a gentleman by the name of Joe Sorge, who runs a restaurant called AJ Bombers in Milwaukee and a new one in Madison. He owns a number of other restaurants in the Milwaukee area as well. AJ Bombers, side note, just was named one of the top brand Twitter accounts just today. So it was really top 10 brand, along with folks like JetBlue, and Joe does an amazing job.
So if I wanted to follow AJ Bombers or Joe, what's his Twitter? I want to check it out.
It's just at AJ Bombers or at Joe Sorge.
How do you spell both of those? Because first of all, it's remarkable that those are Twitter names that people would highlight because it would be so easily misspelled. But
AJ Bombers is AJ and then Bombers like an airplane bomber.
Got it.
And then Joe Sorge is JoeSorge.
Oh, that's not. Well, I guess that makes more sense. It's phonetically accurate. I got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll check him out. But keep going. Tell me more about the story.
So Joe recently started to. Joe uses Facebook a lot, which some people we know whose names we've mentioned already have left Facebook for other places like Google Plus.
Right.
Joe continues to see opportunity in connecting with his audience at AJ Bombers on Facebook, and gets a lot of engagement over there. And so most recently, Joe has opened a new account for his Madison location and started to understand that the type of content that he was sharing at his Milwaukee location wasn't having the same resonance with his Madison location. So he started to, still true to what the type of stuff he wanted to talk about, and to figure out when it was going to be valuable, what types of stuff they wanted to hear and comment on, what would be engaging for them. Of course, it's still, in the end, he's trying to get engagement so people will come into his restaurant and buy his burgers, which, by the way, are amazing. If you ever go, get the berry burger, the peanut butter burger, cheese, bacon. It's phenomenal.
Well, okay. Let me jump in. Because first of all, anybody who makes burgers the way that you describe, clearly they're standing out from a crowd, because who makes those kinds of burgers? And if they deliver it, it sounds awesome. But I want to slow down, because there was one thing that you said quickly. He noticed in his Facebook presences in the two spaces that he had, if I heard you right, that there was something going on that was different in the two spaces. What kind of metrics was he looking at to even see a distinction in the different spaces? Does that question make sense?
Yeah. Well, the simple metric that he was looking at was engagement and comments on his on the content that he was posting.
Okay.
When he was posting it, and what he found out, like, for example, a simple representation of that is the Madison crowd is a college crowd, and so Saturday morning 9 o'clock showing a picture of a burger isn't getting the same level of conversation that 1 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon would.
Brilliant.
So it's just simple shifts, but what Joe does so well is he takes real deep dives into the way that he uses social media, and he does set certain metrics for himself. The thing he measures what matters to him, which is something that we talk about at Human Business Works, measuring what matters most. And it doesn't have to be, every little last, data point. And open rates and click-throughs and all of that are really important for email marketing, or it's all, we can drill down to the tiniest detail. But 2 or 3 high-level metrics that, say, your first effort in this AJ Bombers Madison Facebook page just might be how, the engagement that I'm seeing on my page, just what's the engagement like, and that's the metric. And then looking at when I'm posting, how I'm posting, types of the way that I'm posting, how I'm engaging people. And Joe's great because he manages it himself. along with managing an empire of restaurants, and he's right there to comment.
I mean, that first of all, that's remarkable, because I know the common lament in all these things is people are watching this right now, and they're all, I can see, just like me, they're over here scribbling notes, going, "Oh, okay, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that." But it's funny. I just had dinner last night at this a guest that will be on in a couple weeks. He actually won his name's Jason, and he has this thing called the Green Lime Truck here in LA, and he won the Truck Wars, which is a big deal out here. These kind of taco truck kind of things. And then he sold his lime truck, and he opened a restaurant in a really crappy part of town, but it's just extraordinary food. And he's out there, and I said, "Hey, will you be on my show?" And he said, "I'd love to be on your show, but I'm here from 6 in the morning till 11 at night every single day. In fact, we can't even Skype. You're just going to have to come in, and we'll get a beer and we'll have a conversation." I'm like, "I can do that, no problem." But I was struck by that, because I'm like, how does a guy like that, or a guy like AJ, or not AJ, Joe, how does a guy like that find the time to even find those metrics and engage the different Facebook spaces? It feels like, just with my own little Facebook page, I'm like, this is it's one thing to like or comment or kind of engage, or I did 76 jobs this year, if you count personal and professional, in shooting, and I think I posted maybe 8 of them, and I'd like to post all of them, and I have these aspirations in my mind of, oh, that'll happen someday. But practically speaking, can regular Joes, that's funny, his name is Joe, can regular Joes actually do this in a manageable way, and see engagement increase?
So here's my regular Joe story.
Okay.
And not real Joe, but it's a story that Chris shared with me, but it relates to Maine, and it relates to this issue of time. I think it's a great example of it. Chris was in Maine to do a speaking engagement a few months back, and the morning before the speech, went to this little diner in Lewiston, Maine, and I forget the name of it, but he was sitting there having breakfast, and as he's sitting there, he sees this gentleman sitting at the diner bar there, and in a half an hour's time, as Chris is eating, 3 people come up to him at different points and say, "Hey, it turns out he was a roofer, contractor." And so one person comes up and says, "Hey, I need you to come by. I need my chimney repointed, and I need some other work done on the roof. Could you come by and get that done for me?" Absolutely, no problem. A few minutes later, the next guy comes by, and similar story. "Hey, we need to have the roof reshingled, and we'd like to have you do it. Could you come by, give us a quote, and we'd love to hire you." And a little bit later, a third person, same story, garage, roof, it doesn't really matter, but again, came by and wanted to hire this guy for business, and he's just sitting there having breakfast. So Chris approaches the guy and says, "I have to know what's going on here, because you just closed 3 sales sitting here having your breakfast." And the guy said, "Well, I've been having breakfast here every single day for the last 3 or 4 years. I come here every morning, and in the course of a week, I usually close, at least 2 or 3 sales, if not more.
Wow.
But this is where I come, and this is what I do, because people hear it, people know who I am, spending time here." Now, let's imagine that guy sitting at the bar there at the diner bar and having a conversation. He overhears a conversation about the local football teams, state football. They're going into the playoffs, and they haven't been there in years. And he sort of chimes in with "Wow, my son was on the team that won it the last time. Isn't that really great?" And engages in the conversation. On his left side, there's another conversation about a new business that's opening in town, so he engages in a conversation about that. The fact is that this man has spent 4 years, almost an hour a day, deciding to be where people are, where people are having conversations, where people are going to get to know who he is, and just simply being who he is. And eventually, people started to know who he was, and approaching him and what he did, and now he's getting business from it.
Yeah.
And so the same thing goes with an online presence. It's a matter of, if you knew that people, your business, your clients were there, and all it was going to do was take a half an hour to an hour a day, you would put yourself there. You'd go to that physical location.
Right.
So now we're talking about going to a virtual location and spending that time. But I'm sure this guy's a busy man. He runs a business. You know,
Sure.
he's got roofs to put in, but he's made a choice to spend an hour a day having breakfast at this diner.
Well, okay, that's fascinating because first off, my mind's exploding with questions, and I'm like, which one do I get to pick? Because I know our time's limited, but I know a lot of small business owners who go to Facebook and log a lot of time and don't get that kind of return. Like they go to where people are at, and is it how they're engaging? Is it where they go on that space? I'm sure it's all these things, but when I get the local diner, and honestly, it's funny. I'm very affirmed right now as you're talking because a year or 2 years ago, I was a wedding photographer, and 2 years ago, I decided that was incongruent with the lifestyle I wanted for my family. I have 4 small kids, and I'd like my wife to like me, and being on the road a lot for destination stuff was really rough. And then you throw in speaking and stuff, it was just tough. So then I made the decision that I'm going to kind of move home. And we live in a very affluent neighborhood. It's kind of my ideal target demographic. We moved in this neighborhood for this particular purpose. But for the 3 years I've been here, I've not really gotten to know my neighbors. And this year, that's all I've done. I mean, I do deliveries of big canvas prints of portraits on my skateboard to cul-de-sacs 3 streets over. And as long as I don't crash, we're great. And but people see me. I'm like a billboard. Like people, I swim at the local pool. I coach the local 4th grade photo team for the yearbook. All that stuff, and I see the fruit. I mean, all these moms I did moms with cameras courses in my living room,
Wow.
and all that stuff I'm blown away at. Like you say, so it's very basic, it's very human, it's right underneath my nose. Meanwhile, the temptation was to go out of my neighborhood and like take up an ad or do a junk mailer or something, and so that makes sense to me in the physical world. But in the virtual world, where so much time is seemingly wasted in Facebook, and that is the conversation is, gosh, why would I? And it seems like a lot of the conversation is in my vertical, photographer to photographer in the online space. But where do you go virtually to engage the direct client in the online space? That's a loaded question.
It is a loaded question, but it's a good question to ask. And I going back to your physical story, you made a choice to move to this neighborhood, to move to this area of the world, because your target demographic was right there. So you knew exactly where you wanted to go. So whether we're talking about Facebook or we're talking about Google Plus or we're talking about Twitter, the first point and choice that you've already made is you knew where your target demographic was spending time.
Right.
Then once you're there, you're starting to engage in the things that are already going on around you in that space. So in the case of Facebook, one of the things that I talk about is there are a couple of different, there are more than 2, but we'll talk about 2 different strategies. One is to be that I'm going to talk about photography all the time and be the helpful photographer guy on Facebook, and just offering support and advice and information and sharing other people's information, not just promoting your own. Chris always talks about sharing other people's stuff 12 times, promoting other people 12 times more than you would promote yourself. And he's always pointing out great content that's useful and helpful to his audience, far more than he's providing, and he provides a lot. So I think there's something to be said for that.
Yeah.
So you can be that helpful, right in that vertical. Or one of the other options is to be the local connector. So if you're in a particular area, if we take the example of this, the guy in the diner.
Yeah.
So maybe it's looking at a specific demographic where you're talking about things that are local to you. If you're just trying to draw business locally, so that you would participate in conversations around a local weather event, you would participate in conversations around the local football team going on, and intersperse other content that is germane to your business.
Sure.
But I think there's sort of 2 different strategies there. One is to be the helpful in the vertical and hope to attract, but I think then you get photographer to photographer interaction.
Right.
or helpful in your community and determining whatever that community looks like, by participating in the conversations that are going on around that community, not just in a physical community.
I love that.
Those would be the two strategies that come to mind, and then it's before all of that, before you're providing and putting it out there, all of that it starts with listening. And if you go and Google "grow bigger ears," you'll come up with a post by Chris about listening and how to set up kind of a listening station for online. So determining what you want to listen for, if it's that local content, or you want to listen about your own brand, or whatever. So that's just a useful little post.
Well, I mean, it's huge on so many levels. First off, I know everyone has left the show and is now Googling "grow bigger ears," which probably wouldn't be all bad. But it's funny. What's popping to mind, and in all these shows, my interest is to think from the perspective of the folks who are listening and who aren't in this dialogue directly. And if I'm at home listening to this, first off, I would be very excited, as I am right now. But it would be tempting to default to, what he's saying is I need to do a better job on Yelp, or I need to finally decide, is it Facebook or is it Google Plus, or should I put all my effort in trying to get people to Twitter? And I get the kind of technical mechanics that those are questions that do need to be addressed.
Yeah.
But as those are being addressed, like, what are the things? If those are the tools that I leverage to be a connector, or to listen, or to whatever, what context or frame of mind ought I have as I'm engaging a tool like Facebook, or deciding between putting my energy into Facebook or Google? Like, for example, for myself, I use Hootsuite, and it's not that I love Hootsuite necessarily. I just default to it, and it's a place where I have a number of Twitter personas. Same persons, just me. It's me, Fast Track Photo, and then I have a Facebook page, a friend page, a Google Plus page. But my Hootsuite doesn't plug in to Google Plus easily.
Not yet, anyway.
Not yet, right? Unless I pay for Enterprise or something. And I look at all these things, and I'm like, it's just, I actually want to go create. Like, that's what some of my job, it is to connect all these things and then get commissioned to go and do this work. But I'm constantly looking for greater and greater efficiencies, and I have on my to-do list endlessly, like, go deal with your Yelp, because Yelp could be really helpful or whatever. But I also know, number one, I'm thinking about this probably a little bit more than someone who's just starting out in the photo world. So I'm already at an advantage, and I feel at a deficit because I'm still behind in trying to gauge all these things. So what advice would you give to a guy like me, or a guy who's just starting out, or a person who's starting out, around the mindset they need to be in as they're engaging these different tools?
So that feeling of being overwhelmed by all the tools and which direction do you go in, I think is very, very common. And there's actually, in your interview that you did with Handley, she talked about, she gave a great example in it about a client of hers who just wanted to build engagement through their email list. So they chose one specific target, one specific goal, and put their efforts into engagement through their email list and connecting with people there. So instead of being so overwhelmed and figuring out how to sort out your time and spend it in all of these different places, starting with one simple goal, one simple place where you think you're going to get the most traction. And I would argue, email list building is huge still. I mean, the numbers on email engagement with brands right now is, I think, I've heard numbers of 90% of people have an email relationship with a brand, 14% on Facebook, and 7% on Twitter, or 4% on Twitter.
That's remarkable.
I'm making all of this up, but
well, yeah, but there's a desperate number, like
there is. Yeah. So making that first choice of where is it that I am going to spend time, and then starting to figure out, so what is the goal there? What is the metric that I want to measure? And for Joe, Facebook; for Joe, engagement. So then how am I going to do that? What type of information am I going to share that I think will get engagement around that strategy?
So could a singular goal, if I'm hearing you right, with Anne's example, and by the way, Anne speaks very highly of you guys, and it was really great to get to know her and have her on the show. And if you haven't seen that show, by the way, go check her out in the archives because she's fantastic. But a simple goal of like, I want to build my list, whether it be if I'm talking to photographers, I want to build my photographer list. If I'm talking to local clients in Newport Beach, California, I want to build that list, and I want to make it dense and responsive. Is that a singular goal that I could put all my focus in?
Yes.
Okay.
And you can look right at Human Business Works and the efforts that Chris has been doing on his site that will underscore the fact that that's one of our efforts right now that we're doing, along with his efforts on Google Plus, is really to develop our list there, and develop engagement with people there. It's just a really good channel, and we were able to provide people some really useful information and content.
Mm-hmm.
The types of stuff that people are getting on our newsletter. We used to have 2 paid newsletters. One was called Blog Topics. Chris would write a weekly email about, and send out 10 different ideas on blogging.
Mm-hmm. I remember that.
The other one was How to Blog for Business, and we recently shut them down and said you can't pay for this anymore. Our goal is actually we're going to be providing all that same content for free on our Human Business Works newsletter, and really because we believe strongly that we can. We want to grow our audience there. We want to engage people in that channel, and that was the best way to do it. And if you look at Chris's site, you'll see that it's all pointing to that.
That's great. So if I'm listening to this, I'm pretty intrigued, and which I am. And when I think an offline, I'm excited to actually talk to you guys more specifically about what you're doing. But if I'm at home and I'm listening to this, I'm like, gosh, I'm a company of one. I'm in my first 18 months of business, or I've been at this for 3, 4, 8, 10 years, but I need to kind of get in restart mode. How could they engage Human Business Works? Or can they? Or is it kind of out of reach? Because honestly, you and your team and Chris, it feels from the outside looking in, it feels like, oh man, it's like calling up Seth Godin and saying, hey, will you consult with me? Like that, right. It's a lot to ask. Are there tools available for everyday Joes to engage that they can actually justify investing to get a return? So
the 2 free tools, actually I'll say 3, 2 free tools actually right now are just chrisbrogan.com. Chris has for years been delivering incredible, useful content, and as you pointed out, people started taking notice of him on Twitter in the early days because he was the first one to crack 100,000 followers. Mm-hmm. And I think, but part of that reason was the level of engagement, personal engagement, and the type of stuff that he's writing about on chrisbrogan.com has always been enormously helpful. Mm-hmm. And it's very consistent. And actually, I'll speak to that in just a second. So the other place that we were talking about earlier is through the newsletter. Those 2 places and the type of content that people are going to get about information and ideas. The latest newsletter was epically long and incredibly useful about video blogging and how to use video. Everything from how to use it and things to say, not say, how to practice, things like that. But a review of different technologies for consumer level products to prosumer level products to the software buys from free to high end and so it was really useful stuff to get going in video blogging. So those are 2 free places. And then what people will start seeing more of is we're going to be offering really helpful webinars down the road.
Great.
Where you can engage us as well. To engage us on a consulting level is a little bit more of an investment for sure. I mean, mm-hmm. Chris's speaking rate is very high, and it's hard for individuals and solo companies to do that. But I really believe the type of engagement that he brings and always has brought at Chris Brogan and through the newsletter. I mean, he responds to questions that people send him personally on that newsletter. We have thousands and thousands of people who we send the email newsletter to, and he's still answering questions directly. So there's a real personal engagement there that we're never, it's hard to scale, but it's going to be hard to ever let go of that.
Well, it's true, and honestly, I think one of the things that I'm most impressed by with you and the team, and certainly Chris, is he's always been that way. In fact, fun stories. When I first met him that way, I happened to be in New York City. I was doing a thing for this photo convention out there, and he and Julien had just launched Trust Agents, and he went to the Harvard Club to give a presentation. And it just so happened that, I don't know, a month or two before that, he was in Orange County, California, and literally, I shouldn't have been looking at my Twitter as I was driving, but I was looking at my Twitter as I was driving, and it said that he was at the Orange County Register giving a talk, and I was like, that's so cool. I'm driving by the Orange County Register right now. So I pull off the freeway. I happen to know the photo editor there, a girl named Carrie, and I'm like, at least I can't get in trouble. I can drop her name. So I literally just walk in to the scene, and and there's Chris Brogan 10 feet from me, and I just sit down and I enjoy the talk, and I checked in. No one got mad at me. I wasn't, breaking and entering or anything. Right. But then I engaged him, and it was shocking how, first off, he'd already engaged me a little on Twitter, so there was some context there. And I can't imagine, given the gazillion people that he's engaging. And I know he didn't know me personally, but there was a sense of like he knew the me's of the world personally, and that was very significant. It also was he was very gracious. Like he introduced me to another guy named Brian Elliott who does this thing called Linked OC here in Orange County, and he and I had become close friends. And again, all this kind of compounding value that got created both with what he's doing faithfully and that what he saw in the guys like me who are trying to do it in our little worlds, and how that kind of manifests, which led to this conversation. And I honestly think for folks who are at home, I can't overstate how valuable that is to just be consistently doing that over several days, weeks, months, years, and kind of to see the benefit of how that can play out. I do have one last question. That was more of a grand rant than a statement or than a question, but there's a lot of confusion around Google+. And I'm wondering if you just very quickly could give your take on the different social media outlets, especially Google+, and where are spaces that are interesting to you around this idea of engaging in a more human fashion? Because I'm guessing some tools are more hospitable than others in doing that. And I've also noticed guys like, I think Chris has made the jump, but like I think of guys like Trey Ratcliff. He's this photographer. He's like a top 10 Google+ guy, and I can't believe the level of engagement that people are having in Google+, in contrast with the flurry of Facebook. Any feedback on those different outlets?
So I'm going to steal everything I'm going to share with you is other people's thinking. So and stuff that I've heard, but also experienced. In both directly and with some conversations with Chris and so forth. But with regards to Google Plus and the engagement that you're talking about, I think I hear that time and time again. The number of conversations that people are getting, not just in comparison to Facebook but in comparison to Twitter and in comparison to even some comments on their blog. Sometimes the level of conversation and the depth of conversation that's going on there, I think. Part of that comes from the ability at Google Plus to really focus on a very specific interest. So if you go to find people on plus.com, which is not a site run by Google, but there are ways to discover, people who are talking about photography, people who are talking about hockey, people who are talking about whatever interest or passion you have, and then you can start segmenting your list.
People talk about hockey? Just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I'm not a hockey fan. So the ability to start segmenting your lists and really engaging in conversations around your passions, I think, is something that people are really excited about Google+. And because people are there around their passions, it's not this. You're not doing the same sort of sorting that I experience with my family and friends who are on Facebook. And this is something Guy Kawasaki said. I go to Facebook to communicate with my family and friends. I go to Google Plus to meet people that I don't know yet. And so he's building a following or building friendships and engagement over there in a way that he's maintaining at Facebook. And I think that it's a really great articulation of the value of both of them. And I'm not going to leave Facebook because it is where my family and friends are, and I check in there. But how I'm using it is very different than how I hope to use Google Plus, where I'm trying to develop something.
Cool. My gosh, Rob, this is so resourceful. Thank you so much for being here. I guess the last question I always want to ask my guests. And it's kind of fun because in your case in particular, I don't think you're a professional photographer, but if you were one, or you were an aspiring one, and you have your knowledge base that you have and all the experiences, and by the way, we didn't even get into your past with what you've done with nonprofits around special needs families, and I know that for whatever reason, a lot of photographers are in that kind of space, and I know you have a huge knowledge base on that, and I might beg, borrow, and steal to have you back again because it's super. There's just so many doors of conversation here. But my question is, if you knew what you knew now, but you were engaging a totally new vertical, like you wanted to become a local wedding photographer or portrait photographer, pet photographer, whatever, what would you do in the first 90 days?
That's a really great question. Taking all of the if I'm walking in with all of that knowledge of, and I've got the skills down, but the first 90 days of how to represent myself online, I'd go back to what we were talking about, which is figuring out where I think my audience is. If it's wedding photographers, I'm guessing that there's a lot of people that are sharing their wedding stories on Facebook. I just feel like people are going to be having those sorts of conversations. Hey, guess what? I registered here. Oh, conversations about the proposal, conversations with their friends about where they've chosen to go, and people are going to get creative about how they invite people and engage. So that is, it's an exciting time. You've done it. So. I can't even believe you've done that, by the way, because when I think about the burden of someone's wedding day, that's a heavy burden, because if you don't do that right, so more power to you. But I really would I would look for where I think those conversations are happening.
Yeah.
And earlier, and I'm trying to remember if it was in this conversation or another conversation we had, but you talked about in your books, you said putting you in your brand. And I think a lot of creative folks try to use the work that they deliver to communicate who they are. And there are so many other aspects of who you are. So yes, your work is one way in which you get to express who you are and what you do, but it isn't just the work that speaks for yourself. There are other pieces of you that will help to tell that story. And I think your own website has done that well, because there's a lot going on there. A lot of there's stuff about your speaking, there's stuff about your photography, there's the show. So I get all these pieces of who you are beyond the photographer. So when I think about what you said about putting you in your brand, I'm thinking it's bring more. I want to find ways that I can bring more than just who I am in my photography to that conversation, so that people get to engage with me and not just look at my wonderful pictures and choose me because of that, but they're choosing me because of who I am. So I would look for ways to communicate that.
Wow. My mind's bursting. Last year I had the chance to go to South by Southwest for the first time, and I heard, and I need to know this guy's name, and I don't, because I don't go to his site, but the guy that started this, he's kind of the anti-Mark Zuckerberg. Like, he has, what is his name? He's a young guy, but he talks about the multifaceted nature of humans in contrast with the single-dimensional approach of the internet. And he's very critical of Zuckerberg and Facebook, because it kind of promotes a singular track of who you are. And he's trying to say, well, he's a big fan of anonymity, and I hate anonymity on the internet personally. But what is his name?
It's not coming to me either. So
yeah. Well, anyways, you understand the idea, So do you think it's actually possible to? It's a loaded question, but I believe it's possible to highlight the multifaceted nature of humanity in every space that we go to. But it does take a concerted creative effort to do that. And so what I'm hearing you say is that there's a lot of opportunity there if people could tap into that.
Absolutely. I absolutely believe that it's possible, and you're right, it is a bit of a concerted effort, because in some ways you're creating context for that to come out. So the way to help you, it would be to look for context. The diner story, there was context there. There's local context. There's the diner physical location itself. So if you're looking for the community that you want to engage in, looking for context in which you can bring out different aspects of yourself through those channels, I think that's helpful in having it be more human and engaging.
It's funny. Because of the show and because of some introductions that Julien and others made, Cece Chapman and I have become friends, and he and I ironically were emailing yesterday, and I wrote him this cryptic letter of I have the next book you need to write, but I didn't tell him anything in the hopes he'd write back and say tell me more, and he did, and then I wrote him my idea and he hasn't written back. But I think he should write a book called he and Anne wrote Content Rules. I think he needs to write a book called Context Rules More. Because my own bias is content, but context, that feels like the big elephant in the room that I don't hear anybody talking about, and it's in my opinion everything. Because if I set the right context for engagement, then engagement happens. If I don't, I feel like I'm spitting in the wind. Like, does that land for you too, or
it lands exactly? Well, that's what I was saying. That you've got to look for, and you get to bring yourself differently. It goes right back to your earlier story about recognizing different groups were responding to you differently, and you were changing yourself. And instead of just adapting, I mean, we can even say that instead of adapting to those contexts and pushing stuff out to them, you were able to bring different parts of yourself out because of the context. So yes, 10 times yes.
Well, Rob, thank you so much for being on the show. I know that there's a lot of resources, as you already mentioned, chrisbrogan.com, Human Business Works. If you guys are at home, I just started following Rob at Rob Hatch, ROBHATCH, at Chris Brogan. Any other resources we should point people to?
That pretty much sums it up. I mean, I blog occasionally at robhatch.com, and then you can find me on Google Plus as well. I'd love to talk with anyone and continue the conversation there, here, anywhere. So thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, and you're always welcome back here. I will harass you, but if you don't come back, I get it, so no problem.
All right.
Well, thanks everybody for joining in, and we'll see you all next time. Bye, Rob.
Bye.